scientific journal. So his research has been funded by quite a number of funders, including Future of Life Institutes, Level Trust Foundation, and FWO Belgium. So I'm now handing over to Seán, who will give us his talk.
Okay,
please go ahead.
Thank you so much for your kind introductions and for having me here. I guess like there's some connections. I can see my research is quite different from what I have seen so far during the sessions, but I think there's some kind of connections we can draw. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about our recent works on studying the modeling and dynamics of safety behavior in an AI development competitions. This is a joint work with Tom Lenners, Luis Muniz Pereira, and Francisco Santos. I'm going to describe some of the lessons we managed to draw from our modeling based on methods from evolutionary game theory. Basically, it's an extension of classical game theory for dynamical and complex systems. We have seen recent progresses in AI research and development, which have led to great expectations to generate huge benefit for businesses and societies. We have seen growing deployment of AI in many new application domains, such as facial and speech recognitions, self-driving car, robotics, and even autonomous systems or autonomous weapons. Given these great expectations and the huge potential benefits from AI development, especially for those who are ahead of others in this development process, political leaders and researchers have expressed serious concerns about some potential AI arms race in the development of AI, which could lead to like AI companies and developers cutting corners on safety precautions and eventually some forms of AI disaster. We can think about many kinds of disaster here, which is related to unsafe development of AI, for example, losing of public trust on AI products, or some form of increase of social inequalities, or even some forms of existential threats to humanity. We can think about super intelligence AI that possibly take over the world. It's everything is possible. So given this kind of potential disasters and serious consequences from cutting corners on safety requirements when developing AI, it is important for researchers and policymakers to seriously think about how we can provide suitable regulations to ensure benefits from AI development and avoid potential disaster posed by advanced technologies. For that, several questions need answering. For instance, we can ask, what do we actually know about the dynamics of this alleged AI race? Here is, I put alleged because, of course, there's still a debate whether we actually have an arms race or not. But nevertheless, we have here competitions that could kind of encourage participants in these competitions to cut corners on safety precautions, and that is important to study. And we also can think about what do we know about the impact of certain regulatory actions on such race dynamics. So if we can model this system, and we can check what kind of impact certain regulatory actions, for example, efforts from the EU on regulating AI safety. And we can also ask, is regulation always useful, and useful in what sense? We can think about if we over-regulate certain technologies, for example, when this is not too risky, the level of risk is not too high, then if we put a very strict regulations on it, it could lead to over-regulations of the technologies, which prevent the technologies from fulfill its full potential. So one way we can answer all these questions is, say, we can collect data of behaviors of AI companies or developers in certain domain, and even impact of certain regulations. But the problem is that this data is hardly available, especially at the early stage of development of technologies. And so given the lack of necessary data to answer these questions from kind of data analysis point of view, in our work, we argue that possibly the best way to study all these questions is to use some form of computational or behavior modeling, because we don't have data to build data-driven models, so we need some form of computational models. Perhaps like without data, we already can draw some insights to answer these questions. So in our work, in our recent work published in Shire, we adopt evolutionary game theory, an extension of game theory for modeling dynamical systems. Here, clearly we have a dynamical complex system situation because we have multiple actors, for example, companies, developers from different sectors who might have different strategic behaviors. So we can see an ecology of interactions here, and it is important to consider and to model the dynamical and stochastic aspects of the system. Evolutionary game theory has proven powerful to study evolution and emergence of several collective behaviors from interactions among both humans and artificial agents such as corporations, coordinations, and fairness. If you're familiar with this literature, there are plenty of work like to study different sorts of collective behaviors using evolutionary game theory. And here we applied it kind of for the first time to study the collective behavior of safety compliance in AI competitions. So I'm going to present here a very simple model from our work, which is illustrated enough to demonstrate our approach and findings. For several extensions and generalizations, please look at the paper. So here we consider a domain X in AI. For example, it could be self-driving car or chess or even AGI. And we have a number of participants, a number of actors trying to reach the supremacy in this domain. And who reach the supremacy or dominations in this domain first will get a very large prize. And in order to reach this supremacy, there are a number of advancements, which is denoted by W here, a number of rounds of advancement that need to be completed in order to reach the supremacy. And here, the participants' speed of development may depend on their strategic behavior. So people, actors might do it safe or unsafe. And for example, doing it unsafe might be quicker than taking everything into account. And this parameter W is important here because it captures the time scale of an AI. We can think about a near-term AI where W is small, say with a couple of development rounds, you already can reach kind of supremacy in a certain domain. Say, okay, perhaps we already reached supremacy in chess because we can already beat human, while in AGI probably will take very long time. So each advancement requires a choice. A player can play safe, meaning that they comply with safety requirements in the development process completely, or they can play it unsafe, which means they ignore safety precautions. And play safe is not only more costly, but take more time than playing unsafe. So here, what we do here is, so playing safe, when playing safe, the player has to pay a cost C, while playing unsafe pays nothing. And the speed of playing safe, of safe development is normalized to 1, while the speed of unsafe development is larger than 1. Yeah. So by ignoring certain safety precautions or in the process of development, players can move faster and get more advantage in this race. Because it's race, then speed is important. So we first describe the payoffs in 1 round of the repeated games for race. If you're familiar with game theory, it's very important to derive the so-called payoff matrix, which describe the outcome of interactions between different actors or players in an interactions. So when you can see here, when 2 players plays safe, yeah, then they both pay a cost C while sharing a benefit B. Yeah. There's an intermediate benefit by deploying the technologies in that route. And when a safe player interacts with an unsafe player, the safe players pay a cost while getting a smaller benefit than the unsafe player. And when 2 unsafe players interact, they both share a benefit without paying a cost. We have already expanded this to multiplayer games. Yeah, you can look at the paper. So here, for now, we denote this payoff with this color. Okay, so now let's us define what are the possible strategies in this AI supremacy race. The most trivial one is the one who always plays safe in all rounds. We denote it by AS. The other unconditional strategy is to always play unsafe in all the rounds, denoted here by AU. And a player can also use any combination of safe and unsafe moves during the race. And here we assume that whenever there is some unsafe actions during the development process, there is a probability of AI disaster. And this disaster probability is proportional to the frequency of unsafe actions during the development process. We study both cases where the disaster only impacts the focal player, those who develop unsafe technologies, and when it's shared among all players in the race. We focus here on the first scenario, which is usually argued to be the most relevant for AI risks. Nevertheless, we show in the paper that even if risk is shared to some degree, the general observation remains the same. So we now can derive the average payoffs for the whole repeated games, which is required to analyze the model. So here, the average gains from the repeated interactions represent a player's fitness or social success in the learning dynamics. So the one who have higher fitness is more likely to reproduce or being imitated by others through social learning. So here, for example, we show a payoff matrix for 2 strategies, AU and AS. You can check the details in the paper, but the things I would like to highlight here already is that for unsafe players, the AU, there's a probability P-risk here that they would lose everything that they have gained during the interactions because of the disaster. Why for AS, they does not have that problem. But the AS nevertheless have a lower payoff during the interactions when competing with unsafe. So there must be some kind of balance between safety development and taking risks. So to analyze this model, we use a standard evolutionary game theory method. Say here we have populations where players are randomly assigned a strategy initially. You have seen the possible strategies. So we can here have AS or AU, so the unconditional safe or unsafe players. But we also can have the conditional safe player in this analysis. So then at a time T, a random player is chosen from the populations for behavior update, which consists in either randomly exploring the behavior space. So the player can just randomly explore some other strategies, yeah. Or it can imitate someone else's strategies based on social learning, meaning that like the more successful the other is in this kind of competitions, the more likely that I would copy their strategies. Basically, social learning. So using this evolutionary game theory method, we can analyze this model. Yeah. First, we look at so the impact of the time scale of the development process. It can be near-term AI or it can be a long-term AI, and we want to first look at how this time scale influenced the outcome of the system. So first we look at the short-term AI here, where we have a small w, meaning that you can reach supremacy in this domain very quickly. So in this case, the average gain from winning the AI race significantly outweighs the benefits generated by AI deployment in each round. So here we obtain both analytical and numerical results. You can see here we plot the frequency of unsafe behavior over time. So this is long-term frequency. If you are familiar with Markov-Chain's method, this is basically the results of stationary distributions. So we show this probability, this frequency as a functions of the development speed. So S is the speed of unsafe development, where the speed of safe development is normalized to 1. And we also show the relevance to the risk probability. So you can see here, below this yellow line, AU is preferred to AS by learning dynamics. And below this white line here, all AUs is more beneficial than AS. Basically, below this white line, a population of individuals adopting unsafe behavior has a larger social welfare than a populations of safe players. Yeah. By social welfare here, we mean the average population gain obtained over time. So from these observations, we can interestingly split the whole parameter space into 3 important regions, which help answer the questions of when regulatory actions are required and when not. So namely in zone 1 and zone 3 here, we call them the compliance and the innovation zone. There is no need for regulation because behavior selected by learning dynamics is actually generating the high social welfare. So here we can see that individual and collective interests are aligned. So in that case, we don't need any regulation because we get what we want. Yeah. But the problem is with zone 2 here, which we call the dilemma zone. Here, regulation of unsafe behavior is required because safe behavior would generate a higher social welfare than unsafe. But it is, however, not selected by learning dynamics. Basically, here we want to have safe behavior in this dilemma zone, but it is not. We do not obtain that because it is not selected by the learning dynamics. So in short, we can see that in this short-term AI, regulations of unsafe behavior is required, particularly in this dilemma zone. So here I'm showing similar analysis for larger group size. Says here we have 5 instead of 2 companies or actors who are competing for supremacy in a domain. Yeah. We observe that while the size, you can see that the size of zone 3 does not change, the size of zone 2 here is significantly increased with the group size. Yeah? So that is, there's an increasing need for regulations of unsafe behavior when more participants are in the race. So the more participants trying to compete for supremacy in a certain domain, the greater necessity there is for us to try to regulate the unsafe behavior. And now let's look at the long-term AI scenario when W is large. Yeah. So for example, many people think it will take very long, if not forever, to reach AGI. So in this case, the average benefit from winning the race is actually quite more compared to the intermediate benefit generated from each round of the race. So by generating kind of by deploying intermediate product during the race, we already can gain significantly more benefit than what gained from winning the race. So here, what we observe is that as with the short-term case, we can also split the parameter space into 3 zones. And similarly, the compliance here, the zone 1 and the innovation zone 1 and zone 3, we do not need any regulations because we already get what we want. However, in zone 2, yeah, we need regulation, but it's different from the short-term case. Here in the dilemma zone, we need to promote unsafe or risk-taking behavior in order to maximize social welfare. So far, we already know when it is required to regulate and what should be regulated, depending on the time scale to reach supremacy in a certain domain. So namely, we only need to regulate for domains in the dilemma zone. And it is when is it the short-term AI, we need to regulate unsafe behavior. Why? If we have a long-term AI, we need to advocate risk-taking actually. Yeah. So far, we have seen some insights from this analysis on how we can provide suitable regulations, but whether it is enough, whether the job done here, unfortunately, it is not, because we still need data to estimate which zone the race occurs in a given AI domain, because we don't know exactly what is in which zone the competition is taking place. For example, is self-driving car or facial recognitions occurring in the dilemma or compliance zone or even in the innovation zone? Yeah. So for this, we would need to estimate the risk level of a given AI technologies in relation to other parameters, such as the speed of development gained from reducing safety requirements. But it is not usually not, this data is not available at the early stage of deployment. So if we unconditionally regulate a certain behavior, for example, unsafe behavior in the short-term case, we might expect over-regulations of innovations in the innovation zone, because here we prevent innovations unnecessarily. It's because we don't know in which zone the competition is taking place. So we study explicitly if we just unconditionally kind of regulate unsafe behavior, what happens? So we show in this +1 paper, so the impact of applying several forms of incentives, such as punishment and reward. Yeah, so punishing unsafe behavior or reward safe behavior. How that would impact the outcome of the dynamics. Here we don't have, assume that we don't have data, so all the incentives are applied unconditionally, yeah, without knowing in which zone the competition is. So I'm going to show an example with peer and institutional punishment. Here how we model it. So let's say here we have a PS is a peer punisher, so a player within the system who, if he or she observes unsafe opponent, it will try to reduce the speed of that unsafe opponent, but like the speed of the player is also reduced. Yeah. So here, let's say PS is the peer punisher. So PS play safe while AU play unsafe. Yeah. So then PS punish AU. Yeah. So then now both players' speeds are reduced. Yeah. We also can think of institutional punishment or some kind of regulator. So we have an institution or a regulator who is not part of the system, who tries to reduce the speed of unsafe players. For example, you can think of like EU, the UN, who try to regulate AISafety. So we show here that for this type of incentives, although we can reduce unsafe behavior in zone 2, which is desirable, we also reduce the unsafe behavior or here, which is innovations in zone 3, the innovation zone. So it is actually over-regulation because we prevent the beneficial innovations from happening. Yeah. So you can see that by unconditionally applying incentives without knowing in which zone the competition is taking place, it can lead to over-regulations of beneficial innovations. So far, we can see that due to the lack of data to estimate which zone the AI race occurs in, we need perhaps other smarter ways for regulations. So that is what my group has been working on. So nevertheless, from our findings I described, we know that it's crucial to take into account the timescale of a certain domain when designing regulations or governance for development in that domain. Otherwise, you might regulate the wrong behavior, which would be detrimental for social good. So just to conclude, we have described here a plausible model. This has been just our first shot. So, but it's a plausible model that can be useful when thinking about AI governance policies and regulations. We have seen that timescale to reach AI supremacy strongly influence the type of regulatory actions required. Yeah. So if it's near-term AI, we might need to regulate unsafe behavior, while if it's a long-term or something far away, we actually need to promote or advocate innovations or risk-taking. We can see that incentive can improve safety outcome in the dilemma zones, but can lead to over-regulations in the innovation zone. So it's very important that we know which zone the competition is taking place. So you can look, check more details from our publications here. So a few directions for future work. So you can see that to appropriately apply incentives, one needs data to estimate the risk, which is usually unavailable. Yeah. So we go for new approaches for ensuring safety compliance. We have an effort that can, to some degree, address that. You can check the preprint if you want. Yeah. So so far, you can see that we have done mostly mathematical models without empirical evidence. And what we want to do in the future is to try to get some empirical evidence to either support or disregard the models, and we see how we can improve the models to provide better predictions. Yeah. So one way we plan to use is to use behavior experiments in a control lab. Is this usually used by economists and psychologists for game theoretical models? We have seen it can bring lots of insights, for example, for climate change interactions, and we want to use that for AI race interactions. And of course, real-world data collection would be highly desirable, but as we mentioned, it can be not significantly available at the early stage of development, but we are looking into that. Yeah. So just a quick thing. Yeah. So we also have a talk and a poster presentations at the main track. So you can, if you want to discuss more about this topic, feel free to drop to check our video streams and poster sessions as well. Yeah. Okay, last but not least, I would like to thank our funder, the Future of Life Institute, for funding these works here. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
All right, thank you for Tian's great presentation. So I'm pretty sure that this is a very hot topic in terms of AI governance. And I'm pretty sure that using some principled methods to do this will benefit our understanding about this complicated problem. So I can see that we already have an audience who raised their hands. Mauricio, you are the first one.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the great talk. I had impression that, I mean, you defined AI supremacy as a winner takes all kind of, you know, prize, whereas maybe in reality, you know, it might be a bit different, right? We might not have a you know, a system where, you know, that is valid. That's a valid assumption. So I was wondering, you know, if your analysis extends to other situations where you don't have a winner takes all kind of, you know, definition of supremacy.
Yes, I think that's a great point. Actually, it's straightforward to extend to that, because we have this. I think that AI winner take all situation is captured by this. I think this parameter B, which is we say is B is very large. So by scaling B, saying okay, even winning the race, you might not take a significant advantage over others. Let's say, yeah. So you have B here, the parameter B, which is the price of winning the competitions. Yeah. So, but we anticipate that by reducing B is actually very similar to the situations where you have a long-term AI, where winning is actually doesn't kind of influence much the fitness of the player. Yeah.
Thank you.
But definitely that's a very important point, because indeed we in many domains we don't have the winner take all situations, and the benefit from winning in a certain domain is probably not that significant compared to the benefit gained from deploying the AI technologies in each route of the interactions.
Thanks.
John?
Yeah, thanks, Xiaowei. Tian, it's very interesting. I should actually perhaps say that, as well as working at the University of York, I'm a non-executive director of the HSE, who regulates lots of stuff. So lots of questions raised, but let me focus on two. One, doing what you're doing depends on the model of regulation, and there are lots of possible models, but you know, what one is goal-based, the other being very much rule-based, to saying that, you know, thou shalt do X, Y, and Z. So to what extent does your approach allow for that sort of variation in sort of regulatory approach? The other thing is, in anything like this, there's a framing problem with the any modeling that you do. And so you could imagine something which sounds like it's attractive because it allows rapid AI innovation, but actually the negative impacts of that mean that you lose social acceptance. And so even though in some sense somebody appears to be a winner, actually nobody's a winner, because society says, actually, we're not going to accept this anymore. So could you sort of talk a bit about the types of you know, regulations you're looking at, but also, you know, what the scope of this is, and would those sort of social changes that means that you know, people would no longer accept the technology because they've been turned off from it, be included in the framework of what you've looked at?
Yeah, thank you. Very many important points there. Yeah. Absolutely. So we there are many ways or approaches for regulations.
Of course.
And what we consider here is some kind of very general, abstract approaches. Yeah. So we have so here we have two ways. So we have institutional punishment of unsafe behavior, or institutional reward for safe behavior. Yeah, so you can see it's kind of some very general abstract forms of incentive, which in a way can capture very well many forms of regulations. But of course, there's other types of regulation that cannot be captured within this kind of mathematical approaches of incentivizations. So indeed, but I think if you look at the literatures on behavior modeling, there are also indeed many other forms of kind of regulations or incentivizations that also can bring to this domain. I think one of the kind of effort in AI regulation recently is about soft law. I think that there are lots of effort for soft law instead of hard law, because regulating technology is usually the regulation usually is much slower than developing of technologies and the speed of innovations.
Sure.
So we're also looking at all the kind of proposals from soft law literatures and see how we actually can model those kind of regulation frameworks into our work. One thing I think we mentioned here, which is very close to soft law, is this paper here, where we say, okay, if players can voluntarily commit to a certain safety agreement in advance, and we have some kind of regulations of those who comply with these safety agreements, then we also can escape this over-regulations problem. So indeed, yeah, as you say, there are many ways of regulations, and it's important to look at that.
Yeah. I mean, just say very briefly, I think the idea of soft law is very attractive. It may be one of the few things that enables you to have a dynamic enough system to deal with the rate of change of the technology. So I'm going to have a look at this archive preprint when I can. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I guess we can take a short question. Leon, you wanted to ask a question?
Yes. Also, I also had this idea of the winner takes all, whether that's a good model. I don't think so, but okay. But then I thought there is another dilemma here, which is, I think, really interesting, which I didn't think of even. And that is that you, for example, take autonomous vehicles. You would like to somehow to speed up this development, and it's talking about ethics all the time. It's not so we simply try something and then you get the response from the public. So you can speed up. So everybody can benefit because you have a faster development. So it would not be a winner take all, but it would be simply a faster development for total humanity. So you could have a dilemma there. But then I thought also, I think you should also take into account in the model what you can simulate, because, for example, what we are thinking about is, yes, of course, you want to speed up this. We don't want to talk forever about ethics in autonomous vehicles and so on, but we simply can do this thing by running simulations instead of doing it in the real world and say, okay, let's take a risk, and some people might die, but it's all in the course for future humanity. Instead of that, you could simply simulate. You look at simulations and what can you simulate about these new worlds instead of doing it in reality. So that was my idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so as I mentioned, this kind of a first shot from our group to model this kind of AI race or AI competition dynamics. But indeed, there as one scenario, as you mentioned, is like we can actually like deploy a certain technology, see what happens, and so that we already can collect some data to see like how people react to the technologies, how safe it is. Then we can decide whether either to speed up or slow down. So indeed, we didn't take that into account, like some kind of take into account the external observations, some kind of observations as it goes during the development process. Here is mostly unconditional behavior, so safe versus unsafe. Of course, you might need to, like, the safe player need to be smarter, for example, by like try a little bit with some small group, see what happens before you deploy it.
And there's another thing maybe, which is, I think, really interesting and important to know from our experience, is that so for example, take autonomous vehicles. We can say with development that we want to learn fast and we want to do some unsafe things and then see what happens and then we can improve things. But to our understanding, I think if you go one level deeper, you can understand that safety actually means good specification of behavior. So if we understand better what we really want, that could also speed up much faster. And it basically is the same as the requirement for safety. So instead of having, I have no idea, I try something in society and we'll see what happens, you could also have a more conscious thing that we have to focus more on what we think is really important for ourselves. So it might also be a false dichotomy between having very fast development and then we all have welfare, while basically the problem maybe is that we should specify beforehand better what we think is a good society in the first place. And because we are not able to specify that, we simply try something, you see? So you could also focus more on what actually would be a good thing to develop.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I guess it's about the time. We probably need to move on. I'm pretty sure this is a very, very hot topic. So, and if you want to engage with the discussion, we can do this in our session later.